Greetings, loved ones. Today we are beginning our series on child abuse and neglect. It's time to get serious and stop violence against children. Help us get these messages out. Please subscribe to our channel, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hit the like button and the notification bell, and please share these messages with others. You could save a life. We're going to begin with talking about what is child abuse and neglect. You need to recognize the signs and the symptoms. So the first step in helping abused or neglected children is learning to recognize the signs of child abuse and neglect. The presence of a single sign does not mean that child abuse is occurring in a family, but a closer look at the situation may be warranted when these signs appear repeatedly or in combination. I want you to know that this information is intended to help you better understand the legal definition of child abuse and neglect, learn about the different types of abuse and neglect, and recognize the signs and symptoms of abuse and neglect. Information about the impact of trauma on well-being also is included. Federal legislation lays the groundwork for state laws on child abuse by identifying a minimum set of acts or behaviors that define child abuse and neglect. So we're talking about the United States right now. The Federal Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, called CAPTA, is as amended and reauthorized by the CAPTA Reauthorization Act of 2010, defines child abuse and neglect as, at minimum, any recent act or failure to act on the part of a parent or caretaker which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse or exploitation, or an act of failure to act which presents an imminent risk of serious harm. Most federal and state child protection laws primarily refer to cases of harm to a child caused by parents or other caregivers. They generally do not include harm caused by other people, such as acquaintances or strangers. Some state laws also include a child's witnessing of domestic violence as a form of abuse or neglect. So what are the major types of child abuse and neglect? Within the minimum standards set by CAPTA, each state is responsible for providing its own definitions of child abuse and neglect. Most states recognize the four major types: physical abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, and emotional abuse. Additionally, many states identify abandonment and parental substance abuse as abuse or neglect. Now, while these types of maltreatment may be found separately, they often occur in combination. For state-specific laws, if you want specific laws for your state pertaining to child abuse and neglect, see the Child Welfare Information Gateway State Statutes search page. The link is in our description. So let's talk about physical abuse. Physical abuse is non-accidental physical injury ranging from minor bruises to severe fractures or death as a result of punching, beating, kicking, biting, shaking, throwing, stabbing, choking, hitting with a hand, stick, strap, or other object, burning, or otherwise harming a child that is inflicted by a parent, caregiver, or other person who has responsibility for the child. Physical abuse, it is an abusive action or contact with the child's body. Such injury is considered abuse regardless of whether the caregiver intended to hurt the child or not. So let's define neglect and talk about the different types of neglect. Neglect is the failure of a parent, guardian, or other caregiver to provide for a child's basic needs. Neglect may be physical, for example, failure to provide necessary food or shelter or lack of appropriate supervision. Another is medical, for example, failure to provide necessary medical or mental health treatment. Educational neglect, this is failure to educate a child or attend to special education needs. Emotional neglect, this is, for example, inattention to a child's emotional needs, failure to provide psychological care, or permitting the child to use alcohol or other drugs. Sometimes cultural values, the standards of care in the community, and poverty may contribute to maltreatment, indicating that the family is in need of information or assistance. When a family fails to use information and resources and the child's health or safety is at risk, then child welfare intervention might be required. In addition, Many states provide an exception to the definition of neglect for parents who choose not to seek medical care for their children due to religious beliefs. Let's talk about sexual abuse. Sexual abuse includes activities by a parent or caregiver, such as fondling a child's genitals, penetration, incest, rape, sodomy, indecent exposure, and exploitation through prostitution or the production of pornographic materials. Sexual abuse is defined by CAPTA as the employment, use, persuasion, inducement, enticement, or coercion of any child to engage in or assist any other person to engage in any sexually explicit conduct or simulation of such conduct for the purpose of producing a visual depiction of such conduct, or the rape, and in cases of caretaker or interfamilial relationships, statutory rape, molestation, prostitution, or other form of sexual exploitation of children or incest with children. Before we go on to emotional abuse, I want to make a statement that I believe that prostituting a minor in the United States now falls under the sex trafficking law, which we're going to talk about later. So let's talk about emotional abuse, or sometimes called psychological abuse. Emotional abuse is the pattern of behavior that impairs a child's emotional development or sense of self-worth. This may include constant criticism, threats, or rejection, as well as withholding love, support, or guidance. Emotional abuse is often difficult to prove, and therefore Child Protective Services might not be able to intervene without evidence of harm or mental injury to the child. And emotional abuse is almost always present when other types of abuse are identified. So let's talk about abandonment. Abandonment is now defined in many states as a form of neglect. In general, a child is considered to be abandoned when the parent's identity or whereabouts are not known, the child has been left alone in circumstances where the child suffers serious harm, or the parent has failed to maintain contact with the child or provide reasonable support for a specified period of time. Some states have enacted laws, often called child safe haven laws. These provide for safe places for parents to relinquish newborn infants. Instead of throwing them in the trash or leaving them abandoned in a bathroom, there might be laws that have a place where you can bring the newborn and leave them. Substance abuse. This is an element of the definition of child abuse or neglect in many states, and circumstances that are considered abuse or neglect in some states include the following: prenatal exposure of a child to harm due to the mother's use of an illegal drug or other substance, manufacture of methamphetamine in the presence of a child. I would assume also in the same house, because the manufacture of this can explode the house. Selling, distributing, or giving illegal drugs or alcohol to a child. Use of a controlled substance by a caregiver that impairs the caregiver's ability to adequately care for the child. And I believe I've also heard, they're not listed here, prenatal exposure, mother using drugs while she's pregnant. According to the CDC, over half of all children in the world, listen to this, according to the CDC, over half of all the children in the world, 1 billion children, ages 2 to 17 years, experience violence every year. The question is not if you will encounter a victim of violence. The question before God is, what will you do when you do encounter them? You could be the person who saves a life. You are called. We are all called to be champions for justice. Those who suffer violence need to know that those who love them and those who don't even know them will reach out and give them the help they need before it's too late. Help us get these messages out. Please subscribe to our channel, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Hit the like button and the notification bell, and please share these messages. You could save a life. If you're a victim of violence, if you're a child who is suffering violence, or a woman, elderly, I want you to listen to me. You are valued. You are loved. You are intelligent. You are worthy. God does not want you to suffer violence. He wants you to live free from violence in peace and tranquility. There is a way out. It's not your fault. There is no shame. Someone who abuses you doesn't love you. They're lying. And I want you to know that you're not alone. If you're a victim of violence, please reach out to someone today. If you find yourself in a dangerous situation, call 911 for help. And if you know of a child suffering violence, tell the authorities. You do not need to investigate. Just tell the authorities. They can do the investigation. In our next episode, we're going to talk about recognizing signs of abuse and neglect. Until then, God bless you.